Welcome to the Slade Ham experiment. Get in here. That's it. Settle down. Put your seatbelts on. If there's anything you need to get out of the overhead compartment, do it before they shut the cabin doors. But the midnight spaceship is taking off. We're going to talk about some things in this episode, mainly scuba diving, the underwater half of the world. I am working on the memoir right now. I say memoir. Memoir is it's a genre of writing, of books, and this falls in that, I think, because there's a particular arc. It wasn't memoir, it was a story collection, and then it turns into this new thing. In the process, I've been writing about a bunch of different adventures, and scuba diving has come up frequently. So I want to talk through some things. Some shows coming up you should know about. October 4th and 5th, I will be live. Hyenas Comedy Club Fort Worth, their flagship location, downtown Fort Worth. Beautiful, beautiful club and city. If you're in the DFW area, come join me there. And then October 8th, I'm back in Houston with the original Outlaw Comics. That's right, Jimmy Pineapple, Andy Huggins, T. Sean Shannon, Juan Villarreal, myself. Who else is on that show? Just a killer lineup of legends. So the Mucky Duck, October 8th here in Houston. And for a full calendar, I have some shows coming up at the end of the month and then into November as well. All things. SladeHam.com. Where were we? We were going underwater. I've been diving now for almost a decade. And people usually have one of a couple of reactions to scuba diving. There's either the, oh my God, I love it, my people. There are the, I've never done it, but that sounds fascinating. I keep meaning to, but they don't. And then there's the never, ever, ever, ever will I go underwater under any circumstances. I have been traumatized. I have nightmares. I am claustrophobic. All of these excuses. But the underwater world is not just 70% of our surface area on the planet. It's everything below. And if you're not curious about that part of our world, maybe we're not the same kind of people. I can't help but be fascinated by what exists down there. If you've ever watched, without getting underwater yourself, Watch Planet Earth 2, I believe. Is it Planet Earth or Planet Earth 2? There's an episode called The High Seas. And in that episode, you see lots of things. Pods of dolphins, tuna, hunting in shallow waters, deep sea creatures, things with bioluminescent anglerfish, things that shouldn't survive at pressure, sharks that live down at the bottom. It's an incredibly eye-opening journey to that part of our world. And things like that are what made me want to explore it more. So I remember in the mid-2010s, this is when I learned to dive. And I was doing there was a lot of whatever the male equivalent of eat, pray, love is. I was going through weird relationship stuff. I was traveling 4, 5, 6 different places, sometimes countries, a month or two. I mean, I was averaging 20 countries a year at that time. It's a wild time in my life. And I had some money and I had some time off, and I scheduled me and my friend Brian, a wonderful musician. I don't know why I did that and dismissed him. He's incredible. But he had never been anywhere out of the country, and I was wanting to plan this trip. So we agreed to go do Central America for 3 weeks. And we went through Nicaragua and Guatemala, which totally separate experiences. But we were meeting, I think my brother, the girl I was seeing at the time, some of BC's friends. We were meeting them in Belize. And Belize was where we were going to dive. And I went and got certified. This was January when I got certified. And in Texas, you got a 50-50 shot of January being cold or hot. You don't know. It could be either. It could be summer. It could be a little nippy. And I went to this dive shop on a recommendation from a guy, and if you're going to get certified, you should know there's a lot of stuff. This isn't just true with diving. This is with anything, this entry level. We go in and we think, okay, that sounds interesting. I remember when I was in my teens, really into comic books, and I was impressed by the airbrushed covers of Wizard magazine. That was the comic book magazine I read about the industry. And there were this airbrushed cover, I remember specifically, it was done by Bart Sears of the character Venom from Marvel. And it was beautiful, and I thought, man, that would be so neat to do. So I went and I bought this expensive airbrush with I had lawnmower money. I was making some decent teenage money at the time. I was a baller. I was probably doing better than adult me. But my point is, we sometimes will jump into something and think we need all these tools. And then I got all discouraged because I couldn't figure out how the airbrush worked. And I certainly couldn't mimic the technique or any of that stuff. And I just put it aside and I never touched it again. So when it comes to diving, you get in there, you're excited. Those emotions are worked up. And dive shops, the less scrupulous of the batch, will prey on that. They'll tell you need things. You need to buy all this stuff. You got to buy your own weights. You got to buy a belt. You got to buy a BCD. You got to buy a regulator. You got to buy a custom fit mouthpiece. They would sell you anything you were curious about. What is this? Oh, you should get one. The truth is, you don't need any of it. You need it for your certification, but you don't need it. Because when you go out into the wild, unless you're going on a dedicated dive trip, which I've done in places like the Bahamas or Roatan, where I've brought all my gear to save some money because I planned on diving 10, 15, 20 times in a week. That's a lie, not that many, but a bunch. So they tried to sell us all this stuff. I spent more than I needed. And then to save money, I decided not to do the dry suit certification. I would just do the wetsuit. And they were like, well, it's going to be cold when you take your certification in that Mammoth Lake here in Texas. I'll be fine. It was 39 degrees the day I got certed. The water temperature was around 50, 51 maybe. It was damn cold. And it was a murky, muddy dive. And it doesn't matter. But the point was that the stuff you go through to get certified is not near. It's a week's worth of kind of cool social play with some people. There's some skills you got to learn. There's some intimidating parts, but the fear goes away quickly. I'll talk about some of those in a minute. Belize was the first place I dove. And the second dive, we did one dive that was just kind of an open water reef dive. Nothing spectacular. And then our second dive, we dove Blue Hole. The big blue hole in Belize. And it's an atoll, I guess. And inside of it, deep down, there are stalactites. And it just, this bottomless hole in the middle of the ocean. And you're not supposed to go that deep. I'm not even certified to go that deep. I think we went, was it 140, 160? I think 140 feet. Way deeper than just a regular open water certified diver should go. And we're in a group, and there's dive masters, and you're not unprotected. It would be very hard to lose somebody. But one of the things that happens when you get underwater with pressure and depth, the gases in your blood change. And I don't know how any of the chemistry or science works. But below a certain depth, you can do what they call narking out, which is it's a brain fog like nothing you've ever experienced. And it can happen like you're here at one depth, and then you go a foot lower and you're completely narked out, and then you kind of float back up a little bit and it goes away. But what happens in that couple of foot interval can be terrifying. So I was down on this blue hole dive. And I'm a rookie diver. This is my second real dive ever. I've done all of the testing in Mammoth Lake. I've done all of the pool work. And I've done one real dive in Belize. And then I go down with this group of, I guess there were 15, 20 of us, a ton of us on this boat. I'm probably making that number's probably higher than, the real number's probably lower. 12. We all go down, but I remember being at the bottom. You have your BCD on, your buoyancy control device, which is the vest. And that attaches to your regulator. Your regulator actually attaches to your tank, and your tank goes into the back of the BCD, and it straps in, and then the BCD is the vest you wear. And that regulator, you have a first stage, which hooks up to the tank itself. Then there's a second stage that you put in your mouth, that part. And that keeps the high-pressure air from going straight down your throat. I don't know what it's really doing in those tubes, some science stuff. Then you have a second stage backup device, another regulator it's usually a bright color. We call it an octopus. It hangs off. That's so if yours goes bad, you have a secondary, or if your buddy loses his air or something goes sideways, he can pull off of your tank. So you also have a tank. What is the word for the meter that it reads how much oxygen you got left in your tank? Inflates up to 3,000 psi. When it gets down to 500, you should be at the surface. So I've got all this stuff. And you're thinking about all these moving parts. You also have your goggles on. Sometimes they get a little leaky. We're down there. And I remember being down there, and I got so lightheaded. And I remember checking what I thought was my gauge for how much air I had left. You've also got a depth. You can tell how deep you are. I mean, there's things you have at your disposal. And I went to check all this, and I just remember I was looking, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't giving me the information I needed. And I was feeling kind of buzzy, and it was confusing, like I was drunk. And then I realized I was staring at my backup regulator and none of the gauges I needed. And then I floated up a little bit. You inflate your BCD a little, you float up, and it clears immediately. But your brain goes, holy shit, what was just that? Did I just phase out 140 feet below the surface? You hear stories about this. There's what's called gear shedding. If you don't know about this, there are stories of people who narc out deep, deep, deep below the ocean on a dive. And there can be a sense of claustrophobia if something does go wrong. I've never felt I'm a claustrophobic person, but I've never felt it underwater because you're weightless and you're in this three-dimensional space. And it's incredible. So I'll talk about some wreck dives here in a second that might make you feel different. But you hear stories of this where maybe the goggles fog, something happens, and then instead of going through protocol and procedure, which is what you would do, clear your mask, put it back on, go up to a safe level, do your safety float so that all the gases in your bloodstream level out, and then you surface and deal with the problem. But gear shedding is where people freak out and just start taking their stuff off underwater. And they'll just find their bodies naked and floating. This happens with people it's also with hypothermia. People take off their clothes in super cold temperatures. And it's a psychological thing. You're dissociating from reality in some way. And for me, that's for sure what was going on. Because if I'd have gone another 4 or 5 feet down, that's what I keep thinking. Would they have found me, or would I have just floated? Whew. That's some call of the void stuff right there. I was in the Bahamas. I'd done a wreck dive in the Bahamas, and I remember this being a really cool dive because there were sharks around. And I've been shark diving. I've been down where they feed the sharks, and you're sitting in a frenzy. I've lost all the footage of the last time I did it, but you go down and you sit in a ring with people. You drop to your knees. You put your Wakanda forever position is where you put your arms so that the sharks don't eat them. You tuck your fingers in because you don't want any wiggly, wormy looking stuff. And then they'll crack open a box of fish heads, and the sharks will all come in, and they're black tip reef sharks, but they swirl and they spin, and they're around you, and they're over your head, and they're cutting in from the different sides, and it's intense. Most shark encounters are nothing like that. Most shark encounters, I remember being down at this wreck, and I've got footage of it for sure. I'll see if I can dig it up. But you're just cruising along, and a black tip reefie will just come next to you, and you guys will just kind of be cruising partners for a bit. And it's murky greenish water, and the sunlight's kind of cutting through, and you've got the growth on the sides of the ship, and the barnacles and the plants, and you can go up and in and through some of the holes in these old vessels. And it's an entirely different reality underneath that water. You can't go down there with your regular problems. It's one of my favorite things about it. You have too much to think about. Thinking about your air, the depth, the pressures, your body, everything there is to see. The magic of being underwater is all of the stuff that's unavailable to you on the surface. The nooks and crannies, more than even the what I would call megafauna, the big stuff you can see easily. There's sharks, and there's rays, and there's eels, and there's fish, grouper, colorful fish, parrotfish, all the fish. One of the coolest things you can encounter are octopuses. And one of my favorite places in the world, and I've been diving all over. Where would I say my favorites are? The Bahamas has some really good spots. Sharm el Sheikh in the Red Sea on the other side of the world. But I think West Bay, Roatan is my favorite of them all, because there's a spot right on the tip, and you can walk out, and it's sand all the way down to a certain point. Then it becomes seagrass, and then that seagrass turns into the coral reef, and it's all within about 25, 30 meters of the shore. Probably not even that far. You can just walk out and be in it. And it's cool during the daytime. But at night, it comes to life. It's ethereal and weird and wild. And if you can get yourself in a place where you're not scared of the darkness at night underwater, which is a whole different, if you ever want to play with your emotions and your inner self, you ever want to really stare into the void, the deep is the place to do it. You can do it's fun during the day just to look and imagine what might lurk down there, to mess with your psyche a little bit, to spook yourself, to read yourself a horror novel of your own writing. But at night, man, you can't see anywhere that your flashlight isn't hitting. And I've been on some wild night dives. You see big crabs, you see things flash off to your side. You'll feel something moving in the water, but you can't see it. That's intense. But in the shallows, you can see everything. So just a flashlight and some goggles, and suddenly you're in the water with these octopuses, watching them change color and match the grass and float along the bottom, playing with the little baby ones, seeing little flashes of color in the rocks. That's the stuff I want more of in my life. Right? The stuff that keeps us from doing more of that. It's all the dumb stories we have about how scary it might be. What if my goggles came off underwater? Well, let me tell you what happens when your goggles come off underwater. You put them back on, and you use a little bit of science. You have to go underwater, take your goggles off, and then put them back on underwater. Well, how do you do that? Science. You lean back and you blow through your nose, and that air displaces the water, and then you press them back. Everything's good. I remember watching a girl in the Bahamas. She was my dive partner. I didn't know her. We were just two single people on a boat. We partnered up together. We're down there. We're diving. It's a wonderful dive. And then the glass on her, I think the glass or her goggles, something bad happened with her goggles, and she panicked. And instead of going through all the stuff you should do, tapping your buddy, figuring it out, I'd have given her my damn mask, right? We could have figured this out underwater. But instead she panics and bottle rockets right to the surface. And I tried to catch her by her fin, and I missed. So she was okay. But if we'd been any deeper, she could have had all kind of stuff in her bloodstream. Nitrogen narcosis. That's what is that what narc is short for? Nitrogen narcosis. That's what happened to my brain. It's a wild world. You have to be responsible down there. But we shouldn't be afraid of the ocean. It's one of my favorite places in the whole world. And that West Bay of Roatan, without even going under the water, back floating in those shallows over that sand at night, where you can see the Milky Way. All right. That's my cue to start making more travel plans. I hope you have enjoyed being underwater with me. This is some of the most beautiful traveling I've done has been in dive-centric scenarios. So another episode of the Slade Ham Experiment next week. I love you guys for hanging out with me. Go watch the special if you haven't. Go watch it again if you have. Leave a comment if you haven't done that. And share it with a friend on top of it all. You guys are the best. I'll see you on another episode soon.